Welcome to Mrs. Bryant's World War I homework for West Jackson Intermediate School. Students, you will follow this PowerPoint through to find more out about World War I. We will discuss in class tomorrow any questions that you may have. World War I, aka also known as the Great War. Europe goes to war. Students, pay attention to where Germany is located. They're in the brown area near the Baltic Sea. Also, pay attention to where Belgium and France are located. They're in the green area on your map to the left of Germany. This area in Belgium and France becomes known later as the Western Front. We will talk more about that later. Click to the next slide. Alliances and an assassination. Students, remember that an alliance is a formal agreement with someone else. An ally is a partner in that alliance. During the early years of the 20th century, many European nations formed alliances. In an alliance, countries agree to help each other if one of them is attacked. In 1914, Archduke Francis Ferdinand was the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary. While he visited the territory of Bosnia, Serbian nationalists, Serbians who wanted Bosnia to be part of Serbia, not Austria-Hungary, assassinated Archduke Francis Ferdinand. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia and threatened war. The allies during this time were Great Britain, France, Russia, Serbia, and Belgium. The Central Powers were Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire. Militarism. Militarism was the cause of World War I. The belief in imperialism and a need for more raw materials led some European nations to build great empires. Other European countries wanted to build empires too. This led to problems between the countries that had colonies and the countries that did not. Militarism also contributed to the problems among the countries of Europe. Militarism is the belief that using military force is a good way to solve problems. How do you feel about that? Do you think building a military is a good way to solve problems? Militarism also had some European countries building up their armies and navies. Other countries, afraid of the military strength of their neighbors, also built up their military forces. So literally what they were doing, students, they were trying to outdo each other to see who could have the best military. They thought this was the best way to win a war and win against their neighbor. And this was one of the things that was going on in Europe that caused tensions to be high and for people to start fighting against each other, nations against nations. Students, I have included this slide, A Europe Goes to War, to show you exactly where the Ottoman Empire was located at this time. See there on the map the purpley area near the Mediterranean Sea, the Black Sea, and the Red Sea? That is known as the Ottoman Empire. It is between Egypt and Armenia. Remember, students, I told you we would come back to this area, the Western Front. The Western Front of World War I. If you will pay close attention to this map, the map shows the geographical position of the Western Front stretching from Belgium in the north to Switzerland in the south. Each colored square represents 50,000 men. Yellow represents the German army, blue the French, red the British, and orange the Belgian army. The German army crossed the Belgian border on August 3, 1914. Britain and France declared war on Germany on August 4th. The Germans pushed through Belgium, occupying Brussels before entering France. This map shows the Eastern Front of World War I. This was a line of fighting on the eastern side of Europe between Russia and Germany and Austria-Hungary. Students, it is very important that you pay attention to these maps and have an idea of where these areas are, because as you read or as you watch movie clips, the Western Front and the Eastern Front will be referred to, and I want you to be very familiar where these areas are and what they are referring to. Europe at war. Russia, Serbia's ally, promised to defend Serbia if Austria-Hungary attacked. Germany quickly vowed to fight on the side of Austria-Hungary. Soon, all of Europe was at war. Germany and Austria-Hungary formed an alliance called the Central Powers. Russia, Great Britain, and France became the leaders of an alliance known as the Triple Entity. The conflict eventually involved 32 nations around the world. It became known as World War I. It was also referred to as the Great War. It got its name as the Great War because it was the greatest war the world had ever seen. What is trench warfare? Trench warfare is a form of land warfare using occupied fighting lines consisting largely of trenches. These trenches were long, deep holes in the ground that protected the soldiers from the firing of the enemy's artillery. Now, think about this, students. These soldiers lived in these trenches during World War I. They ate their meals, they slept in trenches, they even had to use the bathroom in the trenches. They would dig a hole, use the bathroom, and cover it up. I know, you're giggling and you think that's funny, but think about it. I don't think that would be a very good place to be. But these soldiers, to defend their nation, lived in these trenches. Now, World War I is the first place historians record trench warfare being used. If you look at the picture on the right, that is a bird's eye view of the trenches on the Western Front in World War I. The picture on the left is a picture of soldiers in a trench during World War I. It looks a little crowded to me. Now, if you look at the picture in the middle, that's kind of giving you a diagram of what a trench might have looked like or was dug out to look like. If you notice, the soldiers had a little raised area where they would step up on to fire their weapons upon their enemy. And then they could step down and had a walking path. But still, things were very crowded in these trenches. I don't think this is a place that I would want to hang out, but these soldiers defended their nation from these trenches. What you also notice is that the ground between each of the trenches, remember that land between enemy lines was called no man's land. Remember they had landmines and wire and things where nobody would want to go, and that was the land between these trenches. Right now I want you to stop the audio, and I want you to write in your journal, I want you to write down what trench warfare was, that it was used during World War I, and then I just want you to take a minute and write a quick paragraph about what it was like to live in the trenches during World War I. U-boats. During World War I, Germany used U-boats. U-boats were submarines. They could stay hidden beneath the surface of the water as they fired torpedoes that sank ships. German U-boats fired not only on enemy ships, but also on ships from other countries. Germany believed these ships were actually carrying goods meant to help the nations it was fighting. Some of these ships carried U.S. citizens. We will learn about the Lusitania, which was fired upon by one of these U-boats, and it sank. Take a minute and in your journal write down U-boats and that they were a German submarine used during World War I to fight off its enemy. The Lusitania sinks. In May of 1915, German submarines sank a passenger ship called the Lusitania. A total of 1,198 people died, including 128 Americans. People in the United States were furious. In reality, the U.S. government was secretly using the Lusitania and other passenger ships to sneak military supplies to Great Britain and its allies. To most people, however, Germany's actions looked like an evil attack against innocent civilians. Public opinion started to change. Most people in the U.S. began to favor war. The United States was concerned about the safety of U.S. ships. When several American merchant ships were sunk in February and March 1917, the United States entered the war as an ally of Britain and France in April 1917. Right now, I want you to take a minute and in your journal, I want you to write down about the Lusitania, and I want you to write down in your words what happened to the Lusitania. How did it sink? Who sank the Lusitania? What happened when the Lusitania sank? What was the Lusitania carrying? How many Americans did it have on it? Take a minute and record these things in your journal. Okay, enduring understanding. You know we love these because this really makes us think. So let's think about it just a minute. When you have conflict, what happens? It causes change. I want you to think about this question for a minute, and I want you to write down what you think in your social studies journal. How did German attack on U.S. shipping change America's policy of neutrality? Remember, neutrality was when you remain neutral. You don't choose a side. You are remaining totally not in favor of one side or the other. All right, go ahead. Write down what you think. Okay, students, this is the moment you have waited for. You wanted to know when the United States entered World War I. Well, in these next few slides, you're going to find out why we entered, when we entered, and what were some of the other causes that made us change our policy of neutrality to entering the war. Remember, conflict always causes change. Good changes, bad changes. Sometimes it will change your policy from being totally neutral to fighting in the war. Conflict caused the U.S. to join the war. At first, most U.S. citizens wanted to stay out of the war. They wanted to remain neutral. They believed it was Europe's fight, not the U.S. President Woodrow Wilson won re-election in 1916, vowing not to get the U.S. involved in the fighting. Over time, however, a number of things happened that led the United States to enter the war. President Woodrow Wilson succeeded in keeping the United States out of the war until April 1917. Up until then, U.S. involvement, though important, was limited to helping the Allied powers by sending U.S. merchant ships to deliver weapons to Britain, sending food and supplies to war-torn areas in Europe, and helping block food from going into Germany. All right, students, we've learned of one cause why the United States changed its foreign policy of neutrality to enter World War I. We're going to look at another cause. This was the Zimmerman telegram. Arthur Zimmerman, you see his picture there on the left, was the foreign minister in Germany. He sent a secret telegram to Mexico City. It asked Mexico to attack the United States if the U.S. ever went to war with Germany. In return, Germany promised to help Mexico win back parts of North America it had lost to the U.S. during the 1800s. Fortunately, Mexico did not agree to the deal. But when people in the U.S. learned of the offer, they were alarmed. The Zimmerman telegram led more citizens to support the idea of going to war. Right now, take a minute in your social studies journal. I want you to write down as the number 2 cause why the United States entered World War I as the Zimmerman telegram. If you have not at this point, I want you to write down the first cause as the sinking of the Lusitania. All right, the U.S. sends troops to Europe. After joining the war effort, the United States drafted 4 million men and was sending thousands of men to France every day. Now, this draft that we are talking about, this is when Congress passed the Selective Service Act, which was put into place as a military draft to make people of the U.S. join its armed forces. After this happened, the U.S. Navy sent battleships to help the British, U.S. Marines went to France, and supplies went to Europe, all in an effort to defeat the Central Powers. America provided help needed to win the war. In the fall of 1918, the Central Powers surrendered to the Allies. World War I was over. Conflict causes change. When we entered World War I in Europe, things changed on the home front. When we refer to the home front, we are talking about here in the United States. Things changed on the home front. World War I helped the economy of the United States. As the war dragged on, European nations needed more and more goods from the United States. The United States also increased its trade with Latin American countries. These countries had lost their European trading partners because of the war. During the war years, the amount of wheat and flour exported from the United States more than tripled. The value of meat from the United States sent overseas rose from $68 million in 1913 to $668 million in 1918. The war also helped other industries develop in the United States. For example, the weapons industry grew as it helped supply the Allies with guns and ammunition. The growing weapons industry needed lots of iron and steel, so the nation's iron and steel industry grew too. To help meet the needs created by the war, other United States companies that had made goods for everyone now turned out goods for the military instead. Women's clothing factories started making signal flags. Automobile factories manufactured plane air engines. Still, other companies, such as the big railroad lines, were used by the government until the war ended. In the United States, many industries were producing more goods than ever before because of the war. Yet the Allies kept needing more. The needs of the United States Army also continued to grow as its number of soldiers reached into the millions. The United States government called on the American people to help, and the people quickly answered the call. To help meet the great need for food overseas, President Wilson asked people to eat less. In response, people had wheatless days and meatless days of the week. They also planted vegetable gardens called victory gardens to grow their own food. Energy saving, too, was a great concern. Americans saved coal by having heatless Mondays. They saved gasoline and oil by having gasless Sundays. In other words, there were no more Sunday drives in the new Model Ts. People at home also supported the United States war effort with their money. During the war years, men, women, and children loaned the government more than $20 billion by buying Liberty bonds and victory bonds to help pay for the war. A war bond was a paper showing that the buyer had loaned a certain amount of money to the government. In return, the government promised to pay back the cost of each bond with interest after the war ended. Most German Americans stayed loyal to the United States. Some were torn two ways, such as a German American mother who said, "I love my fatherland, Germany. Why shouldn't I? But my three boys, they are Americans. I would be a bad mother if I did not teach them to love and live and die for their country, America." All right, it's time to do some thinking again. During understanding time, let's look at this question now. We've had a few minutes to learn some more things about why the United States entered World War I. Remember, conflict causes change. So let's think a minute again about this question. How did German attacks on U.S. shipping change America's policy of neutrality? Take a minute and write your response down in your social studies journal. All right, the influenza of 1918. On this page, you'll see two links. I want you to click on each link one at a time. I want you to go to those websites, and I want you to learn some more about the influenza outbreak of 1918. Think just a little about some of the things we've learned about in science, about the microbes. See if you can make the connection between the two. Enjoy your hunt. It's going to take you a little bit to do some reading, but I want you to make some notes about the influenza of 1918 because you have to know this for our tests and for the CRCT. So right now, click on the first link, read what is there, and then on your second link, you're going to click on, there will be some pictures for you to scroll through and look at. Click on the arrow to the right, and it will move you along in the pictures, and there will be a caption under each picture. I want you to read what it talks about. Go ahead, start learning some more. Okay, did you enjoy your learning? Let's talk just a few minutes about the influenza of 1918. When young, healthy soldiers began getting sick by the dozens in March of 1918, military physicians were baffled by what might be causing it. The source of the illness remained a mystery to scientists as viruses were too small and obscure for the optical microscope available in 1918. Doctors performed an autopsy at Curon-based hospital in Brest, France. Medical staff treated more than 3,000 soldiers suffering from influenza pneumonia, of whom 569 died. Autopsies revealed that influenza victims' lungs appeared strangely blue and were filled with fluid. In September, Victor Vaughan, Surgeon General of the U.S. Army, made the startling conclusion that the 1918 influenza was most likely to kill young, vicarious, robust adults rather than the elderly or children. The United States Public Health Service issued a pamphlet in October of 1918 as part of a public education campaign to slow the progress of this disease. All right, you've learned that World War I came to an end. What you're going to look at now is the Treaty of Versailles. Yes, that word, Versailles, is Versailles. You don't say it Treaty of Versailles. You say it the Treaty of Versailles. This was the treaty that ended the war. The treaty brings peace. The first U.S. soldiers reached Europe in 1918. They arrived just in time to help turn back Germany's attack against Paris. By the time U.S. forces arrived, millions of Europeans were already dead. Many homes and cities had been destroyed. The presence of the Americans made it clear to Germany that it could not hope to win. Germany signed an armistice agreement to stop fighting. An armistice agreement is just that. It's an agreement that says, okay, I'll stop fighting with you now. Germany signed this armistice in November of 1918. President Wilson and the other Allied leaders drafted a treaty ending the war. Although Wilson did not want to punish Germany, the other countries did. Their nations had fought much longer and suffered more death and destruction than the U.S. The Treaty of Versailles forced Germany to take total blame for the war. It also made Germany pay for the war and greatly decreased the size of its military. Many of the German people grew very bitter because of the treaty. Meanwhile, many of the U.S. feared that the treaty would lead the U.S. into alliances with foreign countries. The Senate refused to ratify it, claiming it feared the Treaty of Versailles could lead to future wars. November 11, 1918, marked the end of fighting in World War I. However, it wasn't until the Treaty of Versailles was signed on June 28, 1919, that peace negotiations were complete between Germany and the Allied powers. The Treaty of Versailles had a profound effect on Germany and Europe as a whole. The Treaty of Versailles is based on President Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. Now, students, I want you to click on the link down at the bottom of this page that says Woodrow Wilson's 14 points YouTube. This is a great illustration. It's about 16 minutes long from Khan Academy that explains to you what Wilson's 14 points are. Please take a minute and view this YouTube video. More on the Treaty of Peace, or the Treaty of Versailles. November 11, 1918, marked the end of fighting in World War I. However, it wasn't until the Treaty of Versailles was signed on June 28, 1919, that peace negotiations were complete between Germany and the Allied powers. The Treaty of Versailles had a profound effect on Germany and Europe as a whole. The Treaty of Versailles came with several provisions. It said that Germany must accept full responsibility for causing the war. Germany would not be allowed to make or export weapons. Germany must give up many of its territories, and Germany must pay countries hurt by the war. So this had a great impact on Germany because these were the four things that Germany had to do now as a result of the Treaty of Versailles. I've told you that the Treaty of Versailles had profound effect on Germany. The first thing we're going to look at is the physical impact that the Treaty of Versailles had on Germany. When we're talking about the physical, we are talking about the land that Germany had gained in this war. The physical impact on Germany was really profound. Germany was required to give up 1 million square miles of land after the war. Some of the land had been seized by Germany prior to the war and was returned to its rightful owner, and some of the land was divided up into new countries. Another major impact that the Treaty of Versailles had on Germany was the financial impact. When we're talking about financial, remember we're talking about the money. The financial impact was very profound on Germany too. Germany was held responsible for World War I and was required to pay compensation or reparations, which means compensation, to its allies. Paying these reparations was extremely difficult because Germany had to rebuild its own country too. Much of the land that was lost was rich in raw materials that could have been used to generate income for Germany. The third impact that the Treaty of Versailles had on Germany was the political impact. When we're talking about political, we are talking about the government. The political impact was also profound on Germany. The German people did not support the new government put in place after the war ended. Uprisings increased as economic conditions in the country did not improve. Germany became isolated from and distrusted by other countries. Their role in global affairs of the day was very much affected by the Treaty of Versailles. All right, students, we're almost finished. The last thing that we're going to do for the World War I is a writing assignment. The title of this writing assignment is Minding Our Own Business. All right, I want you to think about some things first. I want you to think about when World War I erupted in Europe in the summer of 1914. Most Americans wanted no part in the war. Neutralism, a policy to not get involved with either side in a dispute, was an important part of the United States foreign policy at that time. We took care of business in our own hemisphere, period. The United States' eventual entry into the war forever changed our foreign policy. We were no longer a country that minded its own business. We were a world power that looked out for the rest of the world. Now, you have one of two choices that you can write about. First choice you can write about is, what do you think about the policy of neutralism? Should the United States go back to that policy? Now you need to tell why or why not. Or you can choose question number 2. How do you feel about the policy of neutralism in your personal life? When should you mind your own business? When should you get involved in other people's disputes? Now, choose either question number 1 or question number 2 to answer. Now, if you're one of my students who wants to exceed the standard, you may choose to write about both. Happy writing! I can't wait to read your writing response.